Count Corley, in the general election earlier this year, the people spoke and in doing so delivered a clear message. They wanted a fairer Ireland with decent services at its core. They were determined to set Ireland in a new direction. They wanted to see a less divided Ireland, a more inclusive and a more caring country. It is evident today the voice of the ordinary people of Ireland has brought about a marked change in budgetary policy. As a party, we campaign for and pledge to work towards a fairer Ireland. For us, that's not just a catchphrase. In practical terms, it means an Ireland that invests in people and services as a priority. The principle of having access to good quality public services when people most need them lies at its heart. We promise to work for an Ireland where the benefits of economic recovery can be enjoyed by all, not just a select few. This budget comes at a time of great uncertainty for our country following the Brexit vote in June, and we face into crucial negotiations on what exactly this means for Ireland. This is the inescapable backdrop to Budget 2017, and it is one we must face up to. Count Corley, let's deal up front with the context for this budget in our Parliament. The confidence and supply arrangement we entered into with Fine Gael requires us as a party to facilitate budgets consistent with the agreed policy priorities in that agreement. We should not forget it is the first time in the history of our state that such an arrangement was entered into. It was entered into because it was necessary to ensure, following an inconclusive general election, that a government was formed. That agreement gives priority to investment in public services over tax cuts and required at least a 2-to-1 split in budgets to recognise the new priorities. This was essential, in our view, to give effect to the message from voters in the general election in February. And that has been achieved in this budget. In fact, it has been more than achieved. In today's budget, the split between expenditure on services and investing in our people on the one hand and taxation measures on the other is actually 3-to-1. By any measure, this is a significant achievement and is a major departure from the policies of the last Fine Gael Labour government. We didn't get everything we wanted in this budget, but we have secured some vital progress on a number of priorities set out in that agreement, including in health, social protection, education, housing and fair reductions in the burden of tax. But Count Corley, I want to be clear on one thing. While we didn't write this budget, from the outside we influenced it as best we could in the direction of a fairer and a more decent Ireland, and we make no apologies for that. Today's budget is a better budget because of the influence we have brought to bear. On the face of it, it is certainly a fairer budget than the last 5 introduced by the previous Fine Gael and Labour government. Like everyone else, we will await all the details as they are released, department by department, over the coming days. Many of the measures announced by both ministers today can be traced back directly to the confidence and supply arrangement entered into prior to the formation of this government and prior to the drawing up of the programme for government. The fact that Fianna Fáil has some role in the passage of the budget will of course be used as a reason to attack us. These attacks will be as predictable as night follows day. What is true is that we have not shirked our responsibility to the people who elected us, unlike others. And it is no harm to cast our minds back to last February, when the people did vote in a general election. No sooner had the votes been counted when parties like Sinn Féin, the AAA, People Before Profit, the Labour Party, Social Democrats and others all said forming a government was nothing to do with them, and they proceeded to take a 10-week holiday before a government was actually formed. When it became clear, Count Corley, that we were not going to get the support to form a government, we recognised our responsibility to ensure that the country had a government, and we played our part in achieving that. Those who will stand up here and criticise every single item in this budget need to be reminded that they had the chance to have their say, but didn't take it. They couldn't bring themselves to do something positive with the votes they received. Instead, they chose the old reliable and most comfortable position of all of saying no, as they always do, to pretty much everything. For too many in this House, accepting responsibility is always the job of somebody else. The bigger picture is the centre ground politics is under attack, and I agree with Minister Donoghue on that. There are various definitions of what the centre ground is. It's under attack not just here in Ireland, but indeed throughout Europe. And when you look at the alternative, you realise just how vital it is that the centre holds. Most people in Ireland are not on the hard left or the extreme right. They are moderate, fair-minded people who want to see their politicians act sensibly and for the common good. In fact, they want those of us with the privilege of being elected in this House to get on with it. They want to see us work together where we can and iron out our differences. They want less of the old adversarial over and back tit-for-tat politics. I have learned a few things in politics, Ceann Comhairle. Those who shout the loudest do not always have the most conviction about their beliefs. Those whose policies more easily lend themselves to headlines or soundbites are not always right. Far from it, in fact. And when I look at the remainder of the opposition here in the House today, I become even more resolute in my view that the centre has to hold. Sinn Féin advocates €1.7 billion of new taxes. At a time of an unprecedented rental crisis, with landlords leaving the market, they want to increase tax on rental properties. At a time when we can't recruit consultants for our hospitals, they want to charge them and others 7% more in income tax. At a time of enormous uncertainty, they want to increase tax on employers. But not to be outdone on the far left, the AAA and PBB have gone for no less than €25 billion in new taxes. Yes, 25 billion. I won't even go into it. That is the alternative to the centre ground. Ceann Comhairle, Fianna Fáil's central point is that the annual budget has to be more than the total of the sums contained within it. It is an opportunity to at least leave a fingerprint of a vision for the country. I will speak in a while about some of the long-term challenges facing our country, but in the here and now, our absolute priority has to be to help people who are in a desperate way because of a terrible housing crisis, those who are stuck on endless hospital waiting lists, the elderly, people with disabilities and those who care for them, families of children with special needs and older people at home without adequate supports. And that's what reshaping budgetary policy in the direction of 3-to-1 actually means, is that you can do something tangible about all of those issues. And that has been our objective as part of this budgetary process. It's not ideological, it's not about getting 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 for the sake of it, it's so that you can actually do something practical and tangible for the people we represent. As a party, we put in the hard yards. We negotiated after the election to ensure a government was formed, and we negotiated again in recent weeks to get as many measures as possible into the budget that we wanted to see. No, we didn't get everything we wanted, but we have definitely had an impact, and I think that will be clear for all to see. Ceann Comhairle, the budgetary process in Ireland is undoubtedly a relic of the past. We welcome the reforms which have started, but much more needs to be done. The Committee on Budget Oversight has done a good job in a short space of time. We now need the Independent Budget Office to be established without delay. Budgeting has to become a whole-of-year exercise, and there should be no late surprises. Take this budget, for example. Every Oireachtas member, and indeed the public, were repeatedly told that there would be just less than €1 billion available in this budget for new measures. In the last week, this changed by 20%, and now it has become €1.2 billion. This makes a mockery of the budgetary reform process and places opposition at a distinct disadvantage to government in the lead-up to the budget. This must change into the future. Ceann Comhairle, this budget has been cast very much in the shadow of Brexit. The truth is we do not yet know what it means for Ireland. Brexit is a leap into the unknown for our country and is set to become the dominant political and economic issue facing the island of Ireland, at least for the next number of years. We have to accept a number of fundamental truths. Brexit is going to happen, perhaps in as little as 2 or 2.5 years' time. It may be a manageable negotiated process, but equally it may not. Competing interests in Europe will want to pull the process in different directions. We will be one of 27 countries on the EU side of the negotiating table, albeit the one with the most at stake. The fact that nobody wants a hard border with the 6 counties doesn't mean it's not going to happen. The fact that the imposition of customs and tariffs would damage both the economies of the EU and the UK doesn't mean it couldn't happen by accident or design. The fact that the common travel area we have at the UK predates our membership of the EU does not guarantee it will survive post-Brexit. We have to accept these realities and plan accordingly. The negotiations that will formally commence when British Prime Minister Theresa May triggers Article 50 by next March will be among the most important this country has ever participated in, and we need to be fully prepared. Much like the Apple ruling from the European Commission, the government here seemed ill-prepared for the Brexit vote. It is an open question as to whether this government has the strength and capacity to meet the challenge of Brexit. Only time will tell, but on the evidence of today, it's not looking good, I have to say. When I look at the practical measures announced, there are a few bits and bobs, Minister Noonan, in particular on the tax side. But when I look at the major challenge facing our enterprise agencies, the Enterprise Ireland, to help Irish SMEs develop new export markets, the IDA to help to attract inward investment from the UK, you have provided €3 million extra on the Jobs and Enterprise Department to help the agencies. It's pathetic, absolutely pathetic. There's €1 million in the Department of the Taoiseach for new units to deal with Brexit, parliamentary liaison and programme for government commitments. €1 million. And the lead department, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, their work, in addition to the establishment of a Brexit team in the department, within existing budget and staffing envelopes. Now, I can tell you, if you compare that to what is being done throughout Europe by all of the other main countries, who have a lot less at stake in the Brexit process compared to we have, my God, they're investing a lot more and they're a lot more prepared for what is coming down the track. And that package is pathetic, and it's going to have to be addressed and changed very, very quickly. For the past number of decades, we have been in the enviable position of benefiting from US foreign direct investment while enjoying a strong trading relationship with the UK and gaining all the benefits of European Union membership and indeed access to the single market. We now need clear leadership to navigate the enormous challenges posed by Brexit, both the knowns and indeed the unknowns. This means defining exactly what we want from the negotiations between the EU and the UK. It means having a plan in the first instance, but critically a plan that is credible and deliverable. There are very current and practical initiatives we can undertake now in order to prepare ourselves for the fallout from Brexit. Prior to the referendum in June, sterling was trading at 77 pence to the euro. Simon McKeever of the Irish Exporters Association has said their research points to 85 pence as the pain point for a lot of exporting Irish companies. With sterling now trading at around 90 pence to the euro, that means a lot of pain already for Irish firms. Jobs have already been lost. This is making Irish goods and services sold to the UK more expensive and making us less competitive. Many SMEs operating to tight margins are unable to pass on this cost to their customers and must indeed try to absorb it for as long as they possibly can. Some of the stats around our dependence on trade with the UK are startling. We import 85% of our energy from the UK. Ireland and the UK exchange €1.2 billion worth of goods and services every week. 14% of Irish goods and services are exported to the UK, but for Irish-owned companies, they export 44% of their goods and services to the UK. And 30% of all employment in this country is in sectors which are heavily related and dependent on the UK market. The fall in sterling is only one example of the immediate pain small businesses are facing in a post-Brexit vote environment. Many commentators forecast a further fall in sterling, which will pile yet more pressure on SMEs and other exporting companies. We have to have a national hedging strategy. We have to draw in the support and expertise of the NTMA to assist SMEs struggling to come to terms with the fall in the pound in the short term. We welcome the plans to reduce the capital gains tax regime for entrepreneurs. The SME sector is one of the principal backbones of our economy, and measures like this will be of some help, modest help, to assist start-ups and will hopefully help to sustain jobs and create more jobs. We encourage the Government, as I said, to provide more funding to Enterprise Ireland, the IDA, the LEOs who are here on the ground assisting SMEs who are exporting to the UK on a day-to-day basis. We all know the agri-food sector in particular is extremely vulnerable to Brexit, with over 27% of exports to the UK being from food and live animals. My colleague Deputy Calleary will address address this issue and indeed other issues facing the farming community in the context of Brexit and indeed commodity prices. Tourism Ireland informs us that the UK is one of our top 4 markets for overseas tourism, delivering some 4.5 million visitors in 2015. Not only do we face being less competitive in terms of our prices, but now we could face a return to restricted travel and passport controls between Ireland and the UK. Ceann Comhairle, this will place even more pressure on our tourist industry and is likely to significantly hurt smaller tourist providers. We are glad to see the retention of the 9% VAT rate for tourism and hospitality. We believe that this is vital against the backdrop of Brexit. Finally, Brexit has serious implications for the border region and our general relations, of course, with Northern Ireland. A hard border between the Republic in the north would be a deeply regressive step, both politically, economically and socially. Many businesses in the border area rely on the free movement of goods and services and indeed of customers across the border in order to survive. A hard border could potentially be the death knell for many of these businesses, both north and south. We have a unique perspective as the only country to have a land border with the UK, and we need to emphasise this at a European level at every opportunity. And we do welcome some of the measures which you did announce, Minister, but you're going to have to be prepared to do more, including very targeted measures around the issue of employer PRSI for SMEs who are particularly dependent on export markets, because they simply will not survive if the current trend continues. There are undoubtedly opportunities from Brexit too, and those have to be highlighted, particularly in the area of inward investment from multinationals wishing to retain a foothold in the EU and from financial services firms currently in the City of London. The idea is going about its work quietly but with purpose, and we fully support them in their efforts to bring more investment to Ireland in the context of Brexit. There are particular opportunities in the financial services area. We need to ensure that our regulatory system has the capacity to accommodate and respond to more international financial service providers in Ireland. We do not want brass plate operations. We want real operations with real jobs located in Ireland. And for all of these reasons and more, we have called, and we repeat the call today, for a minister with overall responsibility for Brexit to be appointed as quickly as possible. Ceann Comhairle, today's budget provides for modest reductions in the universal social charge. Fianna Fáil supports these measures. There are those who say there should be no tax cuts whatsoever in this budget. We believe that working people all over this country also deserve to benefit from the economic recovery. After all, they are paying the taxes which make it possible to provide the public services we all want to see in our society. We should also bear one key statistic in mind. Prior to Ireland's economic crisis in 2008, less than 30% of all tax collected in this country came from income tax. Last year, workers paid over 40% of all tax by way of income tax. The reductions announced today won't make an enormous difference to anyone, but people will take some comfort from seeing the USC going in the right direction. Equally, it is important to be straight with people. Fianna Fáil does not believe it is either possible or desirable to abolish the USC during this Dáil term. It will not happen. To do so would be to put vital public services at risk. However, should the economy continue to recover, there will be scope to continue to reduce the burden of the USC over the years ahead. We also repeat our view that there is a need for a plan to reform and simplify our income tax system, and over time we are going to have to deal with the issue of the entry point to the higher rate of tax at €33,800. We effectively have 3 different tax charges in Ireland on income, each with a different entry point and a total of 10 rates, 15 bands and 22 personal tax credits. Ceann Comhairle, Fianna Fáil did press for a reduction in dirt tax in this budget. Savers have been hit incredibly hard in recent times. The Minister has announced a 2% cut for next year and further cuts in recent years. I would like to have seen a greater cut, but this is at least a start. The rate of dirt has increased from 20% to 41% since 2008, with an additional 4% PRSI for people who have a certain level of unearned income. This has come at a time when interest rates and returns generally are rock bottom. There are people who do depend on interest income, and they have suffered a double whammy in recent times with the hikes in dirt and the collapse in returns. Today's announcement is a modest step in the right direction. It's every person's wish to provide financial security for family members and people close to them. People will naturally want to be able to pass on the benefits of their lifetime's work to their children, grandchildren and other family members depending on their particular circumstances. And many will argue that that's not a priority at this time. But we believe that in relation to inheritance tax, we felt the programme for government commitment to only increase the Group A threshold was very unfair, and I made this point to the Minister in recent weeks. The yield from CAT has increased by over 65% since 2011. In 2015, the largest category of inheritance tax cases, at 33%, was actually in respect of nieces and nephews, followed by gifts and inheritance involving what is known as strangers of blood at 23%. 21% of the cases where a liability arose were in respect of a sibling, with only 18% involving Category A recipients in terms of children. So the programme for government commitment to increase Group A to 500,000, but leave Group B unchanged has now been departed from, and we welcome the fact that there is an increase, albeit a modest one, of 8% also in respect of Group B and C. We also welcome the fact that the home carer tax credit is being increased again in this year's budget. Many families are dependent on a single income, and this will be a very small help. And it will be viewed by many in the context of the childcare initiative, which is welcome and which has been announced as part of today's budget. Many single income families where one partner or spouse makes the decision to stay at home and mind the children, they will feel very put out at childcare supports that are going to those who have to or who make the choice to go to work. And that is an issue which is going to have to be taken into account. So the increase in the credit is welcome. It's very modest. We'd like to have seen more in that area. I welcome the Minister's comments in relation to Ireland's 12.5% corporation tax rate. Fianna Fáil is unequivocally committed to defending this rate. We are very sceptical of the European Commission's plans for a common consolidated corporate tax base. In terms of corporation tax receipts, we are undoubtedly building up a dependence on a small number of companies, and this will need to be very carefully monitored. We need to continue to play our part in the international efforts to tackle the way in which multinational profits can be shifted from one jurisdiction to another, while at the same time defending our vital national interest. Fianna Fáil believes firmly that home ownership is good for families and good for communities. Having a place to call your own, build a vibrant family life around and pass on to future generations is a pillar of a normal, civilised and prosperous society. Yet that basic dream is slipping away from an entire generation. For them, the tax reductions we see today will simply disappear into the widening chasm of rent that is swallowing up more and more of their income. The question is whether or not the government has got it right in terms of the intervention that they're making with the first-time buyer tax rebate. We do not believe that the government has got this right, and we believe that this initiative and intervention actually risks making the situation worse, and we should learn from the lessons of the past. We want to know whether or not there has been a full impact assessment, for example, in respect of this proposal. We want to know what expert advice is available to the government in support of this measure and what independent assessment of the likely impact on the market has been done. The overriding concern we have is that this intervention will simply push up the price of new homes. We have been repeatedly told that the problem is on the supply side, and Minister, you make the point in your speech that this is effectively to stimulate supply. But it does raise a number of issues of fundamental fairness. If you are a returning immigrant and you haven't paid taxes in Ireland in recent years, are you not entitled now to benefit from this scheme? If you want to remain in your local community in an area where there happens to be no new housing supply whatsoever, are you denied the right to benefit from this scheme because you are forced to buy a second-hand home? And what if you're on modest income and you haven't paid that much income tax in the last number of years? Are you denied the right to benefit fully from this scheme? And also, if you owned a property in the past, if you were previously married, a relationship broke down, you're no longer a first-time buyer, and that also raises the issue. If this is about stimulating new supply, then why would you exclude that cohort of people from it? And we proposed a much more gradual, moderate response, which would have taken time to build up by way of a Help to Buy scheme in our manifesto. And Deputy Barry Cowan is working on supply-side initiatives and will unveil those in the coming weeks, because we have been repeatedly told that that is where the immediate problem lies, is in respect of supply. And we don't see how this is going to provide the boost to supply that is promised. The key issue seems to be that it is unviable to build in many parts of the country, and an initiative around, for example, a more aggressive plan to reduce development charges all over the country could potentially have made construction and building new homes more viable in that respect. Our central bank submission on the review of the mortgage rules highlighted the need for tenants to be given some credit in the deposit calculation for the rent that they are paying, and also we have argued that the deposit requirement for non-first-time buyers should be the same as the requirement for first-time buyers. We welcome the modest rollout of further social protection benefits to the self-employed by way of dental, optical and the invalidity pension payments, and we hope that that process can be continued over the period ahead. And we also welcome the further step towards providing equality of treatment in terms of income tax and the equivalent of a POE tax credit for the self-employed, and I hope that that can be completed in the next year or so. When the dust settles on this budget, other issues which are key to household budgets will have to be dealt with. Minister, we will be very much pushing in the coming weeks at the Oireachtas Finance Committee the Fianna Fáil bill to tackle the issue of excessive standard variable interest rates. That issue hasn't gone away. It has not been properly tackled. You told me you intend to meet the banks again shortly. I hope you will press them very forcibly on this issue. It's gone to the ECB for consultation, and the Oireachtas Finance Committee in the next week or two will start holding deliberations on that bill, and we very much look forward to that, because it's not just an issue for mortgage holders, it's an issue for small businesses, farmers, community and sporting groups all over this country who are paying way over the odds in terms of the rates paid elsewhere in Europe. And we also welcome the fact that you have again committed that at the end of next year mortgage interest relief will be renewed for those who are currently receiving it. That will be of significant benefit to those. The whole issue of motor insurance, which is eating into household budgets, and the entire gain in terms of the USC reduction in this budget could be wiped out overnight with the policy premium renewal that people are getting in the post, and that's going to have to be dealt with. We're glad the government has set up a task force that needs to report urgently, and it needs to contain effective measures for implementation this side of Christmas, which can deal with the issue of unsustainable and spiralling spikes in insurance premiums. And we look forward to that being tackled. And indeed, Deputy Calleary will speak about the issue of flooding, and again our lack of preparedness, our lack of investment in terms of flood defences. And there's great concern in the areas that were affected by flooding last winter that the underlying causes have not been dealt with, and people are very fearful of what's coming in the next couple of months, Minister, I can assure you. Across a range of issues that are crying out for long-term action, the government has shown itself to be bereft of ideas. From pensions to infrastructure, energy security to research and development, the government has floundered from the word go. Nearly 60% of private sector workers, for example, do not have an occupational pension. That's almost 1 million workers who will have to rely on the old age pension alone. This is a particular problem, as it will become increasingly common for people to be paying rent in the older years rather than owning their home outright, as was the norm. Among OECD countries, only Ireland and New Zealand do not have compulsory pension saving. And this is one of the long-term strategic challenges facing this country, which simply must be tackled, as is the issue of the state pension. And we were pleased to fight hard and to secure a €5 increase on that payment. But if further increases are to be guaranteed in the long term, we need a clear approach for planning for state pensions, including public sector employee pensions. There are approximately 360,000 recipients of the contributory state pension. This is increasing at an average rate of 5%. And if you look at the demographic changes, it will result in very significant changes in the balance between the number of people at work and pensioners. We have to plan, not just in the short term, but in the medium and the long term, for the challenges that that creates. I will leave the issue of capital investment and infrastructure to my colleague Deputy Calleary. But again, here there has been a distinct lack of direction, lack of imagination and lack of vision in this area, as there has been in the area of energy security, a further issue, particularly in the context of Brexit, where 85 to 90% of our energy is imported from the UK. A hard exit could see energy import tariffs imposed in the UK, and if these are in turn passed on to the Irish market, then this will create very fundamental difficulties for us. Similarly, in respect of multi-annual funding for science, research and technology, these are areas that are vital to our long-term economic interests. Ceann Comhairle, this is not the government we wanted following the general election last February. On 3 occasions, we offered our party leader, Deputy Micheál Martin, as a nominee for Taoiseach, as the only candidate who could lead an alternative to the Fine Gael-led government. We all know the outcome of that process. It behoves all of us now to work as best we can in the national interest, and that is what we have sought to do as a party since election day. Ceann Comhairle, we look forward to debating the budget measures in much more detail over the weeks ahead in the form of the Finance Bill and the Social Welfare Bill. There is a great onus on all of us to examine in detail the measures contained in those bills, and we look forward to fulfilling our parliamentary duties in that regard. All Fianna Fáil deputies and senators will more than play their part to ensure that Budget 2017 receives proper scrutiny over the period ahead. Thank you very much.
Deputy Dara Calleary.
On the 26th of February, the Irish people sent an overwhelming message that fairness in public policy and associated and necessary investment in public services was their #1 priority. In doing so, they turned their back on the US style of politics of those proposing excessive cuts in personal tax burdens, cuts that would come at the expense of investment in public services, including health, education and social housing. They turned their back on the policies of minimising state investment in services and allowing the so-called free market to dictate the pace. They turned their back on policies that denied medical cards to those in most need, policies that ignored hospital waiting lists, that cut supports for older people, and policies that undermined rural and community services across the island. They turned their back, ultimately, on the spin of an economic recovery that many parts of the island and many people were not experiencing. Minister Donoghue spoke earlier of a fundamental shift in the economic environment. Minister, there has been an even more fundamental one in the politics of this country since the 26th of February. Whilst the message was clear, the mandates given were less so, and that has resulted in a period of considerable instability. Parties and independent members in this House faced choices during March and April. We sought the support, as Deputy McGrath has said, of the House on 3 occasions, to ask Deputy Micheál Martin to lead a government that would act on the messages that were sent and begin to reset the course that this country was taken on over the past 5 years. We did not receive that support. The choice then facing us was either to walk away from the responsibility given to us on the 26th of February, in turn leading to a second election and possibly a third, or to work with the result presented to us on the 26th of February to facilitate the formation of a government and to shape a fairer journey for this country. We took the second option. We faced up to the responsibility presented to us by the people, and we facilitated the formation of this government. And Minister, while you say there are people surprised that it has lasted this long, I look behind you and look around you, because many of your own colleagues were saying that long before you said it. Sé aim don socrú muinethe agus soláthar na investú a dhéanamh í serviceí breise, cuidiú le pobl agus éifeacht practical a thuirt go dtí na galantais a lagar ma in bhar ógra. Sé rólatá ag Fianna Fáil na socrú muinethe agus soláthar ná dul chin chun an súnasteach a dhéanamh sna príomhraimsí seo sa bhóiséad 2017. The decision of the electorate, our decision to interpret the electorate's view in the way we have, and the stability that has caused became even more crucial when the people of the United Kingdom voted to exit the European Union. Deputy McGrath has dealt in detail with the potential consequences of that decision. Political instability which would have followed a second election here would gravely add to the negative consequences of that decision. However, in facilitating the formation of this government, Fianna Fáil ensured that there will be a minimum of a 2-to-1 split of the extra money available in this budget in 2017 between investment in public spending and tax reductions. In 2015, that split was 50-50. That means that there is far more money available for initiatives in health, in education, in housing, in childcare, social protection, in capital spending, and achieving that split and its associated expenditure is the foundation on which this all can respond to the challenge laid by the electorate on the 26th of February. The Government has made the choices as to much of the destination of that expenditure. In our confidence and supply agreement, we identified a series of policy principles that we wanted dealt with during the course of the lifetime of this agreement. This budget has shown progress on some of those, and we will use the agreement to seek further progress over the next two budgets. Concur, the notion of a confidence and supply agreement may seem a long way from daily lives. It may seem to be one of those articles of spin so often used in this House. However, arising from today's budget, if you are one of the nearly 79,000 people on a surgical waiting list, the priority Fianna Fáil has given to the National Treatment Purchase Fund, to home help, to home care packages will have a positive impact on that list. If you have mental health challenges, the priority Fianna Fáil has given to ring-fencing funding for the ongoing implementation of Vision for Change in 2017, a figure we understand to be €35 million, without the drama that is being associated with previous budgets, would assist you. If you are on a housing waiting list, the priority we have given to a proper allocation to build a house, but more importantly, the scrutiny that we will give to ensure that they are built, would assist you. We prioritise childcare in the Confidence and Supply Agreement, and accordingly we welcome the 35% increase in early years funding, which will assist with childcare costs. For children with special and additional needs, we prioritise a range of services. The appointment of physios, occupational therapists, speech and language therapists and resource teachers to be ring-fenced in order to address the waiting lists for assessment and subsequent treatments and the delays in school services. If you are a student at secondary school, we prioritise the reintroduction of ex-quota guidance counselling and a commitment to its full restoration over the coming 3 years. If you are a student at third level, we prioritise additional investment in third level education to begin to stem the challenges facing our third level sector. For postgraduate students, we prioritise the restoration of postgraduate grants, ensuring that postgraduate education is not the preserve of the wealthy. We prioritise resources for community initiatives such as Clore and Rapid in rural and in urban communities around the country to build up community infrastructures. And in many other areas, we have prioritised delivery and the development of services, areas which my party colleagues will focus on during this debate, but areas that would not have seen any progress without Fianna Fáil insisting on that split in expenditure before facilitating the formation of this government. We haven't written this budget. There are areas we disagree strongly, but we have a responsibility to this country to provide political stability at a time of great challenge. We have married that mandate of responsibility with the mandate of fairness given to us last February. And whilst we have made progress today on the agenda of fairness, there is still a long way to go. There have been many previous announcements on budget days and on other days that have made no impact on the ground. And it is the priority of everybody in this House, led by the Committee on Budget Oversight, to ensure that the grand announcements made today and the big money mentioned actually hits the ground. For instance, in June of this year, an extra €500 million was allocated to the Department of Health. We were informed that it would assist in dealing with overcrowding in hospitals. It would assist in getting extra home help hours, amongst other health priorities. However, across this country today, there are no new home help hours available. There are no new home care packages available, and that is in spite of an extra €500 million allocation. We were told that this would solve it, but yet there are many people today who are in a hospital bed who cannot get a home help hour, people on palliative care needs who cannot get a home help hour, who are wondering where that €500 million went for them. Hospital waiting lists continue to rise in spite of that €500 million injection. The figures for September show that 78,696 people are in the queue for surgery, with nearly 9,000 of those waiting for longer than the maximum target of 15 months. Another 438,000 people are on outpatient waiting lists to see a specialist, a jump of 3,000 compared to August. And some 47,000 have waited to see a specialist for more than 15 months. The failure to make inroads into waiting lists over the summer, usually quieter months when more beds are free, and after a €500 million funding boost, is particularly disturbing. There has to be early and measurable action on waiting lists, and we feel that the NTB, a National Treatment Purchase Fund, by replicating the successes it had up until it was removed from this area in 2011, can begin to do that. We especially welcome the announcement that those in receipt of domiciliary care will now receive medical cards. And as I said, we await detail of the appointment of physiotherapists, speech and language therapists and OTs to particularly impact on children with disabilities and in special needs. Why is it that services to children with disabilities and additional needs seem to conspire against their families to make an already difficult life journey even more so? Why is it that parents have to fight different departments to get essential supports? Why is it that the silo way of doing government, and I don't mean this in a political sense, I mean it in an operational sense, conspires against families who already have a difficult journey? If this budget does anything, and this provision for children does anything, Minister, we need to break down the silos and make those difficult journeys a little less difficulty. And I will welcome the 900 extra resource teachers. They need to go into the areas where the need is most and where the waiting lists are longer. If we cannot get an assessment for a child, the journey of their life will be even more difficult, and surely we collectively will unite to ensure that this happens on the ground. The ring-fencing of money for Vision for Change is welcome. As I said, we believe that figure to be €35 million. But what is especially welcome is that the last-minute smash-and-grab strategy approach to mental health budget of previous years has been avoided. And again, we will need to see impact on the ground and how this affects those who need the services. And whilst we welcome the reduction in prescription charges for those over 70, there is a case to be made for those who are disabled to get a similar reduction. My final thoughts on health are to remember that in 2017 there can be no revised estimate. There can be no extra €500 million found. If the trend of previous years in 2017 continues, there is no plan B. I'm willing to give Minister Harris a chance on this one, but the record of his two immediate predecessors in matching their budget day rhetoric to patient outcomes was simply appalling. The split between expenditure and taxation has allowed for a small but expansionary social protection policy package. My party has been criticised for promoting an increase in the old age pension. This, in spite of the fact that it is a commitment in the programme for government and was contained in almost all party manifestos ahead of the election. The notion, as expressed by one of our leading broadcasters last Saturday, that pensioners are loaded is absolutely without foundation. Older people were particularly targeted by Fine Gael and Labour in the last government. There was a raft of sneaky cuts and measures which directly affected the incomes of older people. Hikes in prescription fees, despite a promise to abolish them, changes to the eligibility criteria for medical cards, removal of the telephone allowance, reduction in other household benefits and the abolition of the bereavement grant all combined and resulted in an increase in the rate of deprivation for those aged 65 and over to go from 9.5% to 14.3% in 2014. We make no apology, Concurrer, for trying to reverse this trend. We weren't solely focused on pensioners, despite the narratives of some in this House. The increase in working age payments is welcome, especially as it is the first since 2009. And in conjunction with other measures across this budget, it will reduce the burdens for many. We expect these increases to begin at the very earliest date of the 3rd of March. I particularly welcome the increase in the income disregard for lone parents. The €20 increase will go some way towards reversing the changes introduced in the last government, which were misguided and resulted in severe hardship for many lone parent families. And as I said, this is only a start. Childcare is one of the cornerstones of this budget. We fully support the increase in funding to support families in meeting their childcare costs and to support TUSLA in additional responsibilities. But let's be clear, the package for families will only kick in September. I want to highlight some potentially unforeseen problems with the model proposed. We fear that the scheme may be discriminatory on couples who opt for joint assessment of income. The proposal is that households will be able to automatically determine their eligibility by inputting their PPS number online. However, this means an individual earning under $47,000 in a couple who have not opted for joint assessment of income will be able to claim the subsidy even if their partner is also earning. By contrast, an individual under $47,000 in a couple who have opted for joint assessment of income and whose partner is also earning may not be eligible for the subsidy. So you could have a married couple earning $50,000 who do not get the subsidy, while a cohabiting couple earning $80,000 will get the subsidy. and that is something that needs to be examined. In fact, the scheme seems to allow no choice or flexibility and relies heavily on TUSLA-registered childcare operators. We know that creches are already struggling to meet demand for places, and this scheme could potentially double or triple the demand for childcare places in creches. And whilst I welcome the commitment to funding of a sustainability study into the childcare sector, it is essential that this information is available as soon as possible to ensure that there is no unmet demand arising from this proposal. We have achieved a beginning on some of our priorities in education: ex-quota guidance counselling, additional funding for third level for postgraduate students. However, overall the education provisions are underwhelming. While progress on reducing the PTR this year was difficult owing to the pressure of demographics, we have returned to the stop-start pattern of reductions in the PTR at primary level. We need to get serious about reducing the PTR, particularly for those schools under serious pressure, and it must recommence in next year's budget. The reintroduction of ex-quota guidance was a key demand of our confidence and supply agreement. Guidance is essential at secondary school level. It is no longer the old career guidance that many of us would have gone through. It is now a much broader service, and effectively used can be an effective weapon in tackling many challenges facing our teenagers, particularly those in the mental health area. The announcement of an increased €31 million for third-level education was another key input for Fianna Fáil. The Castells report offers a stark picture of the challenges facing our third-level sector. I welcome the fact that the Education Committee, under the chair of my colleague Fiona O'Loughlin, are to begin an in-depth analysis of this report. However, it is essential that this budget send a signal of intent. It is, however, our view that the National Training Fund offers further potential for increasing funding to our third-level sector. And given that it is in surplus, and given the seriousness of the challenge facing our third-level sector, we will continue to pursue this avenue in the coming weeks. The allocation of money towards reintroducing postgraduate grants is a further vindication of confidence supply. Our ability to educate world-beating postgraduates continues to be a major factor in our ability to attract inward investment. However, postgraduate degrees cannot be the preserve of the financially secure. Capital expenditure has long been the Cinderella of Budget Day. The additional money announced today above the pre-budget expenditure ceilings is a drop in the ocean compared to what is required to overhaul and future-proof our country's infrastructure. The current capital plan lacks ambition. It was an exercise in electioneering rather than a genuine effort to grasp the nettle of long-term planning. Its extension over 6 years was essentially used to manipulate the figures to bolster the appearance of a significant increased investment. Ireland has only reached 1.8% of GDP on capital expenditure. Much of our capital spend is simply soaked up by ongoing maintenance costs rather than developing or improving projects. We need to increase this to 5% over the coming years to get to grips with the infrastructural challenge we face. When you consider that organisations such as the OECD, TASC, IBEC, IFAC, ICTU and Social Justice Ireland, in a very rare coalition, have all called for additional capital expenditure, it shows you that that need is well outlined. The Confidence and Supply Agreement outlines a commitment to a full review of the plan in mid-2017. This is a critical part of this agreement for us. It is vital that this review gives an opportunity to take crucial decisions on pivotal infrastructure projects designed to address areas such as housing, transport, broadband, flooding and the bigger threats emerging from climate change. These areas are vital to our competitiveness and our long-term prospects. After years of delay and deprived funding, they can no longer take a back seat. Fianna Fáil has called for the establishment of a National Infrastructure Commission to take a long-term view on our capital spending over the next century. This commission should be tasked with planning over a 25-year period and moving Ireland towards the target of 5% of GDP investment, alongside a target of decarbonising and reaching our targets. Post-Brexit, it is imperative that the EU moves to ramp up capital expenditure. EU rules around spending must be revised with a view to enabling Member States to target investment in crucial infrastructure projects. This will help ensure that the EU thrives in the aftermath of Brexit, and as the country most exposed to Brexit, we surely have a strong case to make. This will require further work with Eurostat to ensure innovative mechanisms like PPPs remain off balance sheet. We must adhere to the fiscal rules to prevent imprudent fiscal policies engulfing Europe, but they cannot be allowed to strangle long-term investment. The Government must take a proactive approach to engaging with our EU colleagues to set this case clearly and set it out strongly. The post-Brexit gloom that has descended upon Europe cannot be allowed to undermine our capital ambition. We need to radically reassess the management of our capital budgets. As a country, we are still poor at delivering large-scale projects on time and on budget. There are many examples of how poor delivery is leading to delayed infrastructure and to frustration. One of the most pressing is those communities that are facing the threat of flooding once again this winter. Frankly, Minister, the OPW has a poor record of delivery to these communities. And whilst the extra allocation to today is welcome, I remain convinced that the OPW has either the capacity or the wish to deliver a proper flood management programme around this country. Similarly, in housing, while there is a big figure announced today, will it actually make a difference? The litmus test of the Government's housing strategy will be how new bricks and mortar housing units are delivered on the ground. It is fair to say that the central obstacles to new social housing provision under the predecessor strategy was not the absence of targets or of spin, rather than a failure to address the obstacles to increasing public supply of social housing. Some of these will be addressed with this funding complement, but many won't be. Local authority new bills in 2015 were the lowest output on record, with just 75 homes built nationwide by county councils. Now we expect councils to start building 1,750 a year. We welcome the ambition, but we've heard it before, and we haven't seen a roadmap to that being achieved. I welcome the announcement of the infrastructure fund, but again it highlights, as do many initiatives, that co-financing is required from local authorities. And whilst much of the attention within the Department of Housing, Planning, Community and Local Government is focused on the housing package, I think it is important in the context of co-financing initiatives throughout the spending document to send a distress signal about the perilous state of local government finances. There has been much focus on the situation at Sligo County Council, but let's be in no doubt that for most local authorities, finances are under considerable pressure, and accordingly their ability to deliver on the spending programmes outlined in this budget and other basic services is considerably constrained. Many local authorities have no money to do basic repairs for tenants in local authority houses, yet you set them the challenge in this strategy of bringing closed local authorities back into use. They cannot make emergency repairs to roads when a problem arises, and they are not in a position to deliver on so many elements of the mandate that they have been given. Rather than putting the funding burden on local authorities through co-financing, it's time we got serious about the role and mission of local government. It's time that we properly defined it to deliver in the 21st century, as opposed to the 19th, for which many of its current structures are designed. And then we need to design a financial model that can deliver on that newly defined role and mission, rather than constantly adding things to its role and making its funding model up as we go along. The capital programme will be the final chance to get real about broadband and mobile telecommunications. The potential of the ongoing revolution in data and telecommunications should no longer be constrained by geography. This capital programme can ensure that. Communities across this island, both urban and rural, have suffered greatly during the economic downturn, as a result of the downturn, but also as a result of a change in living patterns away from towns and cities, be they rurally or urban-based. This leads to a vicious circle. That population decline reduces the prospects of investment, in turn leading to further decline, to empty premises, a withdrawal of services and a further decline. I welcome the announcement of a new town and village strategy within this budget, but again it must mean something. It must actually deliver people and give people the opportunity to once again return to live in towns, to return and live in the empty spaces over many retail premises. Town centre living used to be a major factor of accommodation in this country. It is no longer, for many reasons. A proper strategy would allow that. The reintroduction of funding for the Calleary scheme is a welcome step, but again must be targeted and focused at delivering on essential services such as water schemes, local broadband schemes, and the package for regional road projects and LIS road projects must reflect the lack of investment in this area in recent years. The introduction of funding for RAPID is another acknowledgement of the short-sightedness of Fine Gael and Labour in dismantling many low-cost community initiatives taken away when most communities needed them. Urban communities face the same threat as many rural ones, but in different ways. The common denominator is the willingness of people to stand up for the future of their neighbourhood. That will for action needs to be matched not just by words, but by funding. One of the biggest threats facing our country is the perfect storm being faced by Irish agriculture. Extreme price volatility, ongoing poor weather conditions and the impact of Brexit are all combining to wreak havoc on virtually all sectors of farming. The threat of Brexit to Irish agri-food is stark. IBEC have recently estimated that for every 1% fall in the value of sterling, there is a parallel 0.7% drop in Irish agri-food exports. The analysis showed that the euro climbing to 90 pence translates into a 700 million drop in Irish exports and a potential 7,500 job losses. I welcome the moves in taxation that Deputy McGrath has referred to, and we also pushed hard through our confidence in supply to restore cuts made to Farm Assist, to Rural Social Scheme and to expand the GLAS scheme. And while I welcome the 25 million sheep scheme, the ultimate litmus test of this will be to enable all types of sheep farmers, hill and lowland, to maximise the payment they can draw down. The ANC scheme is an important mechanism to help maintain the continued use of agricultural lands. And while we pushed for restoration of ANC budgets in 2018, we are disappointed to know there is no movement on restoring them, and will continue to pursue this. Brexit represents a serious threat not just to farming but to SMEs, to entrepreneurs and to our retail community. It presents opportunities to the island. However, there is only a €3 million allocation given to our enterprise agencies to pursue those opportunities. It will hardly even cover salaries. And we need to look at other areas to assist our small companies, such as expanding schemes and the Credit Guarantee Scheme and Microfinance Ireland, to assist them in dealing with the challenges presented by Brexit. I'll ask the delivery of the additional services in this budget will fall to our civil and public service. We have highlighted the need the path to pay restoration for our civil and public servants. I want to reiterate again my party's support for the Lansdowne Road Agreement, the provisions for which there is an additional allocation in 2017 of some €400 million. This will continue, albeit on a small basis, income restoration across the board. However, the work of the new Public Service Pay Commission must commence now, and we must set down a path to pay recovery. However, the difficulties and the lack of trust between the public service and government at the moment has as much to do with non-pay issues as with pay. It is essential that the government recognises its past mistakes, its bad attitude, and it works to build trust on non-pay issues. The ability from the spending split underpinning this budget will allow room to improve services and to increase employment in key areas. We now need the government to improve on the other issues that are undermining their relationships with those that work so hard for this state. This year's budgetary process was supposed to be very different in the context of our Dáil reform process. The reality is, it's however very much the same. The continued last-minute, and I mean last-minute, nature of it and the changing goalposts don't lend to the credibility of the budget process or of the credibility of this Oireachtas. That said, foundation stones have been laid to change the way we do budgets, and we must urgently build on them. The advent of the independent budget oversight, which will be in place for next year's budget preparations, has considerable potential in terms of Oireachtas oversight and scrutiny. I am a member of the Budget Oversight Committee, and whilst our discussions were more condensed this year owing to late establishment of committees, we did get a sense of the potential of the committee to scrutinise positions and proposals. And whilst committee members approached that process from very different political perspectives, the discussions were all entirely civil and informing. Arising from my experience of the first phase of the committee's work, I believe, if properly resourced, that committee has potential not just in a pre-budget phase, but especially in a post-budget phase in terms of the responsibility of measuring progress along the themes that I have outlined today. Alaskan Corridor, it would have been politically easier to run to the hills and the beaches of the Mediterranean last March and last April. We haven't achieved everything we wish today. It is the start of a 3-year process. But our first and our major achievement is to secure the split that has ensured that Fine Gael has suddenly become converted to the values of fairness. Others will criticise. They will say they've done things differently. How's $1 billion extra in taxes, anyone? But everybody who criticises need to outline a number of things. Where were they in March, in April and in May, when decisions had to be made about the stability and the political stability of this country? For every interest group they appeal to today, they should account as to their activities of that period and their work on achieving their programme in government. Fianna Fáil stood up to that challenge. We didn't run to the hills. We didn't seek the easy way out. And today, the fundamental shift that Minister Donoghue referred to at the beginning has occurred not just in economics, not just in politics, but in the fairness of budgets. That fundamental shift is our print on this budget.